Well now, hello there, darlings. Pull up a chair, make yourselves comfortable. It's taken me a good long while, a century and 2 years to be exact, to decide to tell this story. Stay with me till the end, because what this family, my own family, allowed to happen, well, it's a story that needs telling, even after all these years. You won't believe how this story ends. My name is Eliza, and the tale I'm about to share, it ain't pretty, but it's mine. And it's time the world knew. If you're the kind who appreciates real-life stories, the kind that make you think, well, you might want to hit that like button and subscribe, because I've learned a thing or two in my time, and sometimes sharing is the only way to heal. Lord, have mercy. Where does a body even begin when a life has stretched out as long as mine? I suppose it all started back when the world was a different place. Back in my day, children were to be seen and not heard, and family business stayed firmly behind closed doors. We lived on a small farm, nothing fancy, but it was home. I had my mama, my papa, and 2 older brothers, James and Samuel. And then there was Uncle Thomas, Papa's younger brother. He was charming, folks said. Always had a quick smile and a story to tell. He'd visit often, especially after his own wife passed young. He'd bring us children little trinkets, penny candy, and Mama always seemed relieved to have another adult around, another pair of hands. I must have been, maybe 6 or 7, when things started to feel off. It wasn't anything I could put my finger on, not at first. Just a feeling, like a cold draft in a warm room. Uncle Thomas, he'd always single me out. Little Liza, he'd call me, my special girl. He'd tousle my hair a little too long, or his hand would linger on my shoulder a mite too much. Little things a child might brush off, or things a busy mother might not even notice. Or maybe she did. That's a question that's haunted me for 90-odd years. The first time it was more than just a lingering touch. I remember it clear as day. It was a hot summer afternoon. Mama was in the kitchen, canning peaches, the air thick and sweet with the smell. Papa and my brothers were out in the fields. I was playing by the creek, making mud pies, when Uncle Thomas found me. He sat down beside me, real casual-like. "What have you got there, Liza Lou?" he asked, his voice all syrupy. And then, his hand was on my leg, higher than an uncle's hand ought to be. I froze. I was just a little thing. What did I know? But I knew, deep down in my gut, that this was wrong. "Uncle Thomas," I whispered. "Mama will be looking for me." He just chuckled, a low, nasty sound. "Mama's busy, darlin'. It's just our little secret. Our little secret." Those words became the bars of my cage for so many years. It didn't stop there, of course. It never does with men like him. It got worse. The visits became more frequent, his attentions more insistent, I tried to tell Mama once. I remember tugging on her apron, tears welling up in my eyes. "Mama," I said, my voice trembling. "Uncle Thomas, he scares me. He touches me funny." She was kneading bread, her hands covered in flour. She didn't even look at me. She just sighed, a tired, weary sound. "Eliza, don't be fanciful," she said, her voice flat. "Your Uncle Thomas loves you. He wouldn't hurt a fly. You're just imagining things. Now, run along and play. Imagining things." Lord, how those words cut me. My own mother. Did she really believe that? Or was it easier to pretend? Was it easier to sacrifice her daughter than to confront her husband's brother? I'll never know for sure, but I swear on my grave, a part of me died that day. I learned a hard lesson. I was alone in this. No one was going to protect me. My papa, he was a good man in his own way, I suppose. But he was a man of few words, and he deferred to Mama in all things concerning us children in the house. My brothers? They were older, rough and tumble boys, off in their own world. They wouldn't have understood, or maybe they wouldn't have wanted to. The years that followed are a blur of fear and shame. I learned to make myself small, invisible. I learned to read Uncle Thomas's moods, to try and stay out of his way, but he always found me, always. And every time, it was our little secret. I carried that secret like a stone in my belly. It poisoned everything. My childhood wasn't a childhood. It was a tightrope walk, a constant state of alert. How does a little girl cope with that? How does anyone? I wonder sometimes if things had been different back then, if people talked about these horrors like they do now. Would it have made a difference? I remember one Christmas. I must have been about 10. Uncle Thomas gave me a beautiful porcelain doll. It had real hair and eyes that closed. Any other girl would have been thrilled. But when he handed it to me, his fingers brushed mine, and he gave me that look. The look that said, "You're mine, and don't you forget it." I wanted to smash that doll against the wall. Instead, I smiled and said, "Thank you," just like a good little girl. That night, I buried the doll in the backyard. I couldn't stand to look at it. It felt tainted, like me. The worst part was seeing him at family gatherings, laughing and joking, with Papa, charming Mama, everyone thinking he was just the kindest, most avuncular man. And I knew what he was. It made me sick to my stomach. Did no one else see the darkness in his eyes? Was I the only one? You sit there, at a table laden with food, surrounded by family, and you feel like you're screaming, but no sound comes out. That was my life, and it went on for years. Years. But things have a way of festering, don't they? Secrets, especially the ugly ones. They don't just stay buried. They grow roots, and sometimes those roots break through the surface when you least expect it. One day, when I was about 14, almost a young woman, my mother called me into the parlor. She looked different, agitated. There was a letter in her hand, and her knuckles were white from gripping it so tight. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "Eliza," she began, her voice barely a whisper. I need to talk to you about something. Something important." My heart started to pound. Could this be it? Was she finally going to see? To acknowledge what had been happening right under her nose? But what she said next, honey, it wasn't what I expected at all. It threw me for a loop, I tell you, and it set in motion a chain of events that would change our family forever. You truly won't believe what she told me that day. So there I was, standing in that stuffy parlor, my mother clutching that letter like it was a lifeline, or maybe a viper about to strike. My mind was racing. Was she finally going to apologize? Was she going to say she believed me about Uncle Thomas? Lord have mercy. The hope that flared up in my chest was almost painful. "Eliza," she said again, her voice still shaky. "Your Aunt Millie, she's very ill." Aunt Millie was Papa's sister, lived a few states over. We hadn't seen her in years. "She's asking for family. Your Papa can't leave the farm right now, and your brothers, well, they're boys." She took a deep breath. "She's asked specifically for you to come and help care for her." Me? Go and care for an aunt I barely knew. It felt sudden, strange. "But Mama," I started. "What about school? What about here?" A small, selfish part of me, the part that still craved a normal childhood, rebelled. But another part, a much larger, more desperate part, saw a flicker of escape. Away from the farm, away from him. "It's already been arranged, Eliza," she said, finally looking at me, but her eyes were distant, troubled. "You'll leave on the train Saturday." And that was that. No discussion. No asking if I wanted to go. It was decided. Looking back, I often wonder about that moment. Was sending me away her way of protecting me without ever admitting the truth? Or was it just convenient? A way to get me out from underfoot? To stop my silent accusations that she must have felt, even if she never acknowledged them? I suppose. I'll never truly know what was in her heart. But darlings, let me tell you, that train ride was the first time in years I felt like I could breathe. The further away I got from that farm, from Uncle Thomas's shadow, the lighter I felt. Aunt Millie's place was a small house in a bustling little town. Nothing like the quiet of our farm. And Aunt Millie herself, she was a surprise. I remembered her as a stern, quiet woman from her rare visits. But the woman I met was frail, yes, but her eyes were sharp, and she had a surprisingly dry wit. She was sick, that was true enough, but she wasn't bedridden, not yet. She needed help with chores, cooking, someone to run errands, and someone to talk to. Oh, how that woman could talk. She told me stories about her childhood, about Papa, about the family history I never knew. She had a way of looking right through you, like she could see all the things you were trying to hide. One evening, after I'd been there a few weeks, we were sitting on her porch swing, watching the fireflies. "Eliza, child," she said, her voice soft, "you carry a heavy burden for one so young." I just stared out into the twilight, my throat tight. How did she know? "It's your Uncle Thomas, isn't it?" she asked, not unkindly. I couldn't speak. I just nodded, tears finally spilling over. And you know what she did? She just reached out and took my hand. "I know, child," she said. "I always suspected. That man, he always had a darkness about him. Your mother, she chose to be blind." I swear on my grave, hearing those words from someone, anyone, it was like a dam inside. Me broke. I cried for hours that night, and Aunt Millie just sat with me, patting my back, letting me pour out all the ugliness, all the fear and shame I'd carried for so long. She didn't interrupt. She didn't make excuses. She just listened. And she believed me. Lord, the relief of being believed. It was like cool water on a burn. Aunt Millie told me more about Thomas then. Stories from his youth, things she'd seen, things she'd heard. "He was always a taker, Eliza," she said, her voice hard. "Took what he wanted, never cared who he hurt. Your papa, he always made excuses for him. Blood is thicker than water, he'd say. Sometimes, child, blood is just plain bad." She told me about other incidents, whispers, things that had been swept under the rug years ago. It seemed Uncle Thomas had a long history of unpleasantness. My own situation wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern. A horrifying, sickening pattern. And my family, they knew. Or at least they suspected enough to look the other way. That was the last straw for any lingering hope I had for them. I stayed with Aunt Millie for almost a year. In that time, I started to heal, just a little. I learned to laugh again. I even made a friend or two in town. But Aunt Millie was getting weaker. The doctors said it was consumption. There wasn't much they could do back then. As she got closer to the end, she started talking more about her affairs. "I don't have much, Eliza," she'd say. "But what I have, I want to go to someone deserving." She made me promise to be strong, to not let them break me. "You've got a good head on your shoulders, girl," she told me one afternoon, her voice barely a rasp. "Don't let them take your spirit. That's the one thing they can't touch unless you let them." When Aunt Millie passed, it was peaceful. I held her hand, just like she'd held mine. Her lawyer, a kind old man named Mr. Abernathy, handled everything. A few weeks later, he called me into his office. He told me Aunt Millie had left her house and what little money she had to me. To me. I was stunned. I was only 16, but there it was, in her will, clear as day. She'd even made arrangements for Mr. Abernathy to be my guardian until I came of age. You can imagine how that news went over back on the farm. Papa wrote, demanding I come home, demanding I sign the house over to him. "It's family property," he wrote. "You're too young to handle such things." Mama added a note, full of guilt trips and pleas for me to do the right thing. Uncle Thomas even sent a letter, sickly sweet, saying how much they missed me, how he hoped I was well, and how he could help manage my inheritance. The nerve of that man. Reading his words made my skin crawl. I wrote back, polite but firm. I told them I was staying. I told them Aunt Millie's gift was mine, and I intended to honor her wishes. I didn't mention Uncle Thomas. I didn't mention the abuse. What was the point? They hadn't listened before. Why would they listen now? But that wasn't the end of it. Oh no. They weren't about to let a 16-year-old girl and a piece of property slip through their fingers that easily. And if you think their letters were bad, you won't believe who showed up on my doorstep a month later. What happened next? It chilled me to the bone, and I knew this fight was far from over. So there I was, barely 16, an orphan in spirit if not in fact, suddenly a homeowner thanks to Aunt Millie's kindness. Mr. Abernathy, bless his heart, was a godsend. He helped me navigate all the legal bits and bobs, made sure I understood what I was signing. He even helped me find a nice older lady, a widow named Mrs. Gable, to live with me as a sort of chaperone and companion. It was all falling into place. A new life. A chance to finally be safe. Or so I thought. One crisp autumn afternoon, about a month after I'd told my family I was staying put, there was a knock on the door. Mrs. Gable was out at the market. I opened it, and my blood ran cold. Standing on my porch, looking smugger than a cat with a canary, was Uncle Thomas. My heart hammered against my ribs. How dare he? How dare he come here? "Well now, Liza Lou," he said, that horrible, familiar grin spreading across his face. "Aren't you going to invite your favorite uncle in?" I wanted to slam the door in his face. I truly did. But I was frozen. That old fear, it just washed right over me. He took my silence as an invitation and just pushed his way past me into the little hallway. "Cozy little place you've got here," he said, looking around with a proprietary air that made my stomach churn. "Too much for a little girl like you to handle all on her own, though. That's why I'm here. Your papa sent me, to talk some sense into you, and to bring you home." "I'm not going back," I managed to say, my voice stronger than I felt. "This is my home now. Aunt Millie left it to me." He chuckled, that low, nasty sound I knew so well. "Now, Eliza, don't be difficult. We're family. We look out for each other. Your papa's worried sick, and frankly, this inheritance, it should stay in the family. It's only right." He took a step closer, and I instinctively backed away. "You know," he said, his voice dropping to that conspiratorial whisper that always made my skin crawl. "We always had our little secrets, didn't we? We understand each other. Lord have mercy. The audacity of that man. To bring that up here, in my safe place." Something inside me just snapped. Maybe it was Aunt Millie's strength rubbing off on me, or maybe I was just tired of being scared. "Get out," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "Get out of my house." He looked surprised, then angry. "Now you listen here, you ungrateful little brat." "No, you listen," I interrupted, finding a strength I didn't know I possessed. "You are not welcome here. You will leave now, or I will call the constable." Back in my day, calling the constable on family was unheard of, but I was desperate. His eyes narrowed. For a moment, I thought he might strike me. The air crackled with tension. I stood my ground, though my knees were knocking. "You'll regret this, Eliza," he snarled. "You'll come crawling back. You'll see." And then he turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I collapsed against the wall, shaking like a leaf, but also strangely exhilarated. I had stood up to him. I had actually stood up to him, but that wasn't the end of it, not by a long shot. He didn't leave town right away. Oh no. He stayed for a few days, trying to turn folks against me. He spread rumors that I was ungrateful, disrespectful, that I'd stolen from my family. He even tried to talk to Mr. Abernathy, to convince him I was unfit to manage my affairs. Thankfully, Mr. Abernathy saw right through him. "That man is a scoundrel, Eliza," he told me later. "Don't you pay him any mind." What Uncle Thomas didn't know was that Aunt Millie had been resourceful. After he finally left town, tail between his legs, Mr. Abernathy sat me down. "Eliza," he said, looking very serious, "there's something else your Aunt Millie wanted you to have. Something she kept hidden away for many years." He then produced a small, locked wooden box. "She told me to give this to you only if Thomas ever came bothering you here, or if you felt you truly needed it. She said it contained a weapon of sorts." My mind raced. A weapon? What could it be? A gun? Money? "She said," Mr. Abernathy continued, his voice low, "that the contents of this box could either bring great peace or great turmoil, depending on how it was used. She trusted you to know what to do with it when the time was right." He handed me a tiny key. My hand was trembling as I took it. What on earth could be in this box that Aunt Millie considered so powerful? And why did she only want me to have it if Thomas caused trouble? Was it something about Thomas? I waited until Mrs. Gable was asleep that night. The house was quiet, only the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. I sat at my little writing desk, the wooden box in front of me. It was old, the wood dark and smooth with age. I took a deep breath and inserted the key. The lock clicked open. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, were letters. A stack of them, tied with a ribbon. And something else. A small, leather-bound diary. It wasn't Aunt Millie's handwriting, on the first page. My heart began to pound. I recognized the looping, elegant script. It was my mother's. But these weren't letters she'd written to Aunt Millie. The dates on them were from years ago, even before I was born. And the diary? It wasn't my mother's diary from her girlhood. This was something else. Something hidden. I picked up the topmost letter. It was addressed to Aunt Millie, but the content, it wasn't from my mother. It was from a woman I'd never heard of, detailing things about Uncle Thomas. Things that made my stomach clench. Accusations. Terrible accusations. And then I opened the diary. The first entry was dated nearly 30 years prior. It detailed my mother's early marriage, her hopes, her dreams. And then the entries started to change. They became darker, filled with fear and a growing unease. And then I read a name I knew all too well. Thomas. My mother was writing about Thomas. About his visits, his attentions towards her. Long before he ever laid a hand on me, it seemed my uncle had his sights set on my own mother. But that, darlings, isn't even the half of it. What I discovered in those letters, and in the deepest, darkest pages of that secret diary. It made everything that had happened to me make a horrible, twisted kind of sense. And it revealed a betrayal so profound, it nearly broke me. You simply will not believe what my own mother had been hiding all those years. Lord have mercy. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold that diary. My mother's secret diary. And those letters. They weren't from my mother to Aunt Millie. They were letters Aunt Millie had collected about Uncle Thomas. From other women. Other whispers over the years. It was a chronicle of his depravity. A testament to the lives he'd touched with his darkness. Aunt Millie had been gathering evidence, it seemed. But the diary, that was the kicker. It was my mother's. And it told a story that turned my world upside down all over again. Fica comigo até o fim, porque o que essa mulher fez com a própria neta vai te deixar em choque. I know I said that at the start, but honey, what my mother endured, and then what she allowed. It's a heavy, heavy thing. The early entries were full of a young wife's hopes. Her love for Papa, her dreams for their farm, for a family. Then, Thomas started appearing more frequently in the entries. After his wife died, he was always around. And Mama wrote about his charm, but also about a persistent, uncomfortable undercurrent. He'd corner her, his compliments too lavish, his gaze too intense. She wrote about feeling trapped, about Papa being oblivious, always taking Thomas's side, saying he was just lonely, just being friendly. Then, the entries became more fragmented, more desperate. She wrote about an incident, an assault. My own mother, by her husband's brother, by my Uncle Thomas. I felt sick. My mother had been a victim too. All those years, when I thought she was cold, unfeeling, complicit in my suffering. She had been carrying her own terrible secret, her own trauma. Why hadn't she told anyone? Why hadn't she told Papa? But then, as I read on, the diary took another turn. A darker one, if that was even possible. After that assault, Mama wrote about Thomas's threats, how he'd ruin them, how he'd tell Papa lies about her if she ever spoke up. She was terrified. And then she found out she was pregnant. With me. A cold dread washed over me. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning frantically. She wrote about her fear that I wasn't Papa's child, that I might be Thomas's. The shame, the horror, it poured off the pages. She never knew for sure, she wrote. She pushed the thought down, buried it deep. But it was always there, a poisonous seed of doubt. And that, darlings, that's why she could never protect me from him. Because every time she looked at me, she must have seen not just her daughter, but also the specter of her attacker, the possibility of a truth too awful to bear. And by letting him harm me, by sacrificing me, perhaps in her twisted, broken mind, she felt she was somehow atoning? Or maybe she was just too shattered to fight for anyone, even her own child. It wasn't an excuse. Lord, no. It wasn't an excuse for what she let happen to me. But it was an explanation. A terrible, heartbreaking explanation. The letters Aunt Millie had collected painted an even wider picture of Thomas's evil. Other women, other towns, same story. He was a predator, plain and simple. And my family for generations had enabled him, protected him, looked the other way. It was a sickness. I sat there for hours, surrounded by these ghosts of the past. What was I supposed to do with this? This horror? For days, I just felt numb. Mrs. Gable was wonderful, bless her. She knew something was wrong, but she didn't pry. She just made me tea and made sure I ate. Then, slowly, a new feeling started to emerge through the numbness. Anger. A cold, clear anger. Not just for myself, but for my mother, for those other women, for every person Thomas had hurt. And I knew what Aunt Millie wanted me to do. She wanted me to use this, to stop him. It took me a few weeks to gather my courage. I wrote a letter to my father. I didn't accuse. I didn't rage. I just told him what I'd found. I told him about Mama's diary, about the letters. I told him Aunt Millie had left them for me. And I told him that Uncle Thomas needed to be stopped. I sent copies of some of the diary pages and one of the letters from another woman. I didn't know what he'd do. Would he even believe it? About a week later, a letter arrived. It was from Papa. Short, terse. He said he'd received my package. He said Thomas would be dealt with. He said he was sorry. Just that. I'm sorry. 3 little words, after a lifetime of silence. Were they enough? No. But it was a start. A few months passed. I heard through the grapevine, small towns, you know, that Uncle Thomas had suddenly left the area. Just disappeared. Some said he'd gone west. Others said he'd fallen ill. No one knew for sure. But he was gone. And he never bothered anyone in our family or in that town again. Papa never spoke of it to me directly. We never had that, heart to heart, that big reconciliation you see in moving pictures. Our family was too broken for that, I think. But in his own way, he'd listened. He'd acted. And Thomas was gone. It wasn't a perfect ending. The scars, they never fully go away. How could they? But it was an ending to that particular reign of terror. I stayed in Aunt Millie's house. I built a life for myself. I eventually married a good, kind man, had children of my own. I made sure, I swear on my grave, that my children grew up knowing they could tell me anything, that they would always be believed, always be protected. I broke the cycle. That, at least, I can be proud of. My mother passed away some years later. I went to her funeral. Papa was an old man by then, stooped and quiet. He just held my hand, his grip surprisingly strong, and looked at me with such sadness in his eyes. No words were spoken about the past. None needed to be. We both knew. And now, here I am, 102 years old. Most of them are gone now. Mama, Papa, my brothers, even Uncle Thomas. I heard he died alone and miserable somewhere out west. Which, if I'm being honest, brought me a certain grim satisfaction. Lord have mercy. It's a long time to carry such a story. But I wanted you to hear it. Because these things, they happen. They happen in quiet farmhouses and bustling towns, in families that look perfectly normal on the outside. And silence. Silence is the monster's best friend. So that's my tale, darlings. It wasn't easy to tell, but it feels lighter now, sharing it. The truth, even when it's ugly, has a way of setting you free, even if it takes a lifetime. And you? What do you think about all this? Teria. Feito o mesmo no meu lugar? Would you have found the strength to confront such darkness in your own family? Me conta aí nos comentários. I'd truly love to hear your thoughts. If you appreciate folks like me sharing stories from the heart, the real nitty-gritty of life, go on and give this video a like. And don't forget to subscribe for more. Because believe me, at 102, you collect a few tales worth telling. Thank you for listening, dears. Be good to yourselves, and be good to each other.